Hey, Andrei, very nice to meet you again.
Nice to meet you, Fabian. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
No, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule for this, especially on a Friday. Let's start with a quick introduction from your side, if that's okay.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And first of all, I have to say I'm also a listener of your podcast on Spotify. So I spent actually quite some time learning interesting things from the very good speakers that you had so far. So I'm happy and honored to also have the opportunity to talk to you about
Much
myself.
appreciated. That means a lot.
About let's say about myself. I will talk about myself in the context of automotive. I would say there are two things that, let's say, define me, and probably they follow me through all of my life so far. I've always been passionate about cars. So as a kid and growing up, my favorite thing to play with, to talk about, to just spend. Later, I got into photography. So my favorite thing also to take pictures is cars and so on. I always had a deep passion for the cars. Now, I think this probably also shaped a bit my professional trajectory. As I started working in automotive in probably and I think for let's say young 20-year-old in late 2000, it was I could not imagine a better start. I actually started working as a car journalist, and that was it was I wouldn't even call it work. I think it was pretty much living my passion and having the chance to test cars, to see new cars, to talk to executives and so on. So it was very fascinating in that sense, but I think it was also a good learning point, because you get the grips and understand the industry and so on. So this is how I started, and after that I was very much interested into, let's say, okay, journalist and test driving cars is nice, but what's the next thing? How can I bring my passion and my studies together? So this is where I actually got myself into automotive, starting as an internship for a car company in product management. And then let's say the story went on the same path. Now I also have to say that I also find myself actually quite fortunate that my professional path, my let's say, yeah, my professional path so far probably overlaps with the most dynamic stage of automotive transformation. So when I started, I think there was a lot of talk about kind of like downsizing and turbocharging engines and automated transmissions and things that were becoming mainstreams, and all cars were getting into it, and quickly after that it became electrification. So I think some of the first electrified vehicles came on the market, and I had my share of involvement with this with two OEMs. And after that, there was all about connectivity and connected vehicle services and telematics and new infotainment platforms coming into the vehicle and so on. And then the next step that I was also, so these two things, electrification, product management, and connectivity, I had the chance to work for two OEMs on these topics in let's say, in various roles. And from this perspective, there was the next big thing that I actually think, okay, I thought, okay, was automated driving and let's say artificial intelligence, and at the end data business. So this is what actually brought me after the two OEM experience at Here Technologies, which is a location platform company that supplies many customers in terms of location services, mapping for navigation, but also quite a lot of offering in the space of ADAS and automated driving. And this was, let's say, my transition. So I moved towards ADAS and automated driving, working with high definition maps with ADAS and so on with the industry. And then in the most recent time, there was a transition towards AI, and AI becoming a big topic for automotive. Now, recently, Gen AI is a very, I would say, it's quite a prominent topic across multiple industries, but also in automotive. I felt that in the past 2 years, everything in automotive needs to have a generative AI component to be interesting, and so on. So yeah, I think that's kind of like in a nutshell how my path went, and that's why I think we're actually living very fortunate times to have this. I find that even if I would say I don't have a particular long career. I've been 15 years plus in the industry, and I think there are still many more years. I felt that the industry is changing, and kind of like every 2 years there's something new that we, let's say, need to learn, or kind of like need to stay on top.
No, thank you so much, Andre. That's some really useful context and a fascinating journey. Let's learn a little bit more about your current role. What specifically do you do in your current capacity?
Yeah, in my current role, and I will talk about this, but then I also, let's say, make at the end, I'll end with a disclaimer. So currently in my current role, I'm the director of industry solutions for automotive. So basically, I'm leading business development and strategy, what we're doing in the space of automotive with let's say services and software. And in a nutshell, for the ones that do not know here technologies, we basically operate on what we call the digital cockpit, and this is all the software, SDKs, location services, and mapping that we provide for navigation. Then there's the area of what we call automated driving, and automated driving for us means like even from simple things like intelligent speed assistance, so providing services for speed limits in the vehicle, all the way to, let's say, level 3 automated driving, where we are providing HD maps for companies like BMW and Mercedes now in production for let's say for more than 1 year.
No, brilliant. Thanks for that. If we So location data, I mean, I hear so much about it at the minute. Where exactly across the customer journey is location data currently being used, and how do you see this shifting over the coming years?
Yeah, very good question. I think this is so. I forgot about the disclaimer. I would say that
Was about to ask about that.
let's say, yeah, you should have reminded me about that. I think in this conversation, the point of views are mainly based on my experience and my view, and they are not meant to represent the corporate view of the company. So, having said this, to get to your question, I think, especially when it comes to you know transportation and automotive, and the main purpose of these industries, is to carry people and goods and from location A to location B in, let's say, in safety and on time and without delays, and if possible also having some fun in between. So all of these experience, they are defined in a way by location data, and this actually has evolved quite some time. If in the beginning of the industry, you have like a physical map that you're basically finding your own way from location A to location B. This is actually coming quite a long way these days. So how is this actually changing? Location now is no longer used only by the driver. There is still, the use case of navigation, either being in a vehicle or on a mobile app and so on. It's still the driver that's the main user of it. But there's still a lot of computing that happens in the back, right? You don't need to plan your routes, you don't need to find your routes and so on. You just kind of like put where you want to go, and then everything is let's say is done for you. So that's a use case that I think all of us, we are kind of experiencing every day, navigating. The other thing that's also happening and now is that it's not just navigation, it's also in many cases ADAS and automated driving are actually able to drive on location data information. So meaning there are systems out there that can drive you from A to B, and maybe with a significant section between A and B in an automated driving mode. So without actually the driver needing to care so much about let's say what's happening, and it gives actually a bit more time back to the driver. That's one other element. The other element, and I think this is the newest addition to the automotive space, is generative AI, where generative AI is, let's say, generative AI is kind of like the automated driving for interacting with navigation and location services in a way. With generative AI, this brings whole new levels of personalization and simplifies trips and plannings for the users significantly, right? I think we are all seeing it that currently, if you want to go somewhere, you kind of need to know where you need to go, and everything is planned. But with generative AI, you might not even need to know the location that you have to go. You just need to know what you want to do, or maybe the system can anticipate what you want to do, and provide you all these let's say personalized and predictive services that you as a user, you are not let's say you are not actively asking for it.
First of all, thank you so much for the overview. That was really clear. Lots of these use cases and areas seem to be heavily dependent on the underlying data. Let's start with, where's the data for these use cases actually coming from?
Yeah. Yeah, I think data, and especially data is important, right? But especially data, when you're combining it with automation, with generative AI processes, it becomes quite crucial, because in many ways, with many, let's say, AI functions and Gen AI models, the output of the model is kind of like tied to the quality of the data that gets in. And in many ways, the quality of the data, you will have to, let's say, build it. So in the case of building high quality location data, usually you're not building this from a single source. I would say all the big mapping companies and location service companies, they're not just building location data, just leveraging a single input. In reality, building location data requires working with information coming from vehicle sensors, with satellite imageries, with probe data and signals coming from IoT devices, with let's say with governments and local authorities. And it's basically an art of merging and blending all these sources and making sense of it that provides the most complete picture. And we believe that in the case of yeah, and the more you run AI processes on top of it, the more you have to have the confidence in the data. And I think this is also where it kind of like comes down to let's say building location data itself is also a big data problem, right? So at the end of the day, what we're seeing in the current days and age is that on one hand, location data is increasingly built with AI tools. And then on the other hand of it, we're seeing that AI systems are increasingly using location data. So in kind of, and it's, I would say it starts to become a sort of a flywheel with like a continuous cycle where location data and AI are working together.
You kind of alluded to one of the areas that I was about to ask you next. One was around some of the, I guess, challenges or potential shortcomings that you currently see, and then sort of a sub question to that you also alluded to with the AI generated data, which is all about synthetic data. What are some of these challenges that you currently see with location data? And then secondly, to what extent is then synthetic data able to address some of those, and where are the limitations of that?
Yeah. Well, I think and I think it depends on a bit kind of like the use case. So maybe I'll start with the end of what you said, synthetic data. And I think synthetic data is actually very, let's say, useful if you are trying to, I would say, bring more richness and bring more context, but it doesn't necessarily need to have to be accurate. So from this perspective, maybe let me give you an example. If you have a map rendering and you want to show it realistic and including kind of like trees, trees actually themselves don't need to be precisely positioned. So you can actually create synthetic data and put it on top of it, and then it starts looking realistic. But the other challenge is, if you want to have accurate data, the accurate data needs to reflect the reality. And let's say if it needs to reflect the reality, it needs to have two things, right? It has to be accurate in terms of time and space. So meaning that something that you have is still relevant. So something it's fresh in the sense that something that you have created in your location data set, it's still there. That's one thing. And then space is also how it's actually related with the other let's say location data assets, because what we're seeing now is that there are more and more overlaps, and especially with in the space of generative AI, you are not using a single point in a location data as an address. You are also combining it with other information that's correlated to it to be able to answer a complex query or provide a personalized experience. And the main challenge, when you are doing location data, is that you have a product that's always changing. Reality always changes. So kind of like, I'm sure that in the moment that you have done mapped something else in a different part of the world is also changing. So it's always this kind of like big data problem, how you stay on top of it, how you are let's say trying to have as much as possible the changes in the real world reflected into the data sets that's being fed into navigation systems or automated driving and so on. And certain things change in different ways, right? Like, for example, things like, think about the road, right? The road curvature of of the curvature of a road is not going to change until you are changing the complete road in many cases, right? But so that's the kind of things that do not change so much. And something that you might have, let's say, created 6 months ago might still be very much relevant today and fresh, even if it was not updated. But there are other things like, for example, speed limits. Speed limits actually tend to change quite a lot during the year, and there are new construction areas, new speed limit changes, and so on. And that's the kind of things that you need to have. You need to be able to catch up quickly to make sure that you are, that you are reflecting this accurately. So, and so this would be, let's say, some of the challenges, right? Certain things you can do with certain more static methods, while other features in location data you have to have access to, let's say, to sensor inputs from vehicles, and you need to have more eyes on the roads than just looking at it from satellite imagery, like for example.
You mentioned that one of the key possibilities or potential advantages of location data is providing enhanced personalization to end users, to the individual that's actually owning and or using a vehicle or mobility service product. Let's maybe touch on some of these end customer use cases that location data would be able to unlock, especially considering maybe some of the recent AI functionality that everyone is talking about.
Yeah, there is. So I'm going to refer to a couple of use cases that they happen to be also be products of my company, but they are use cases that they're announced in the industry. So I can talk in detail about them. The first use case, and I'm going to talk about this because this is something that I actually experienced this morning. So many vehicles have what's called a self-learning navigation in the vehicle. And this actually means that the vehicle is observing where you're driving, what are the places that you are stopping and visiting and so on. It all happens in the background. So you just need to, let's say, accept to enable this feature, and then you don't need to do anything else. And typically what's happening this was exactly my experience this morning. I usually come to the office and I drop my son to the kindergarten. And this is a trip that I've done hundreds of times, so I don't need to use navigation, or neither in the vehicle or in a phone. There's actually no need for navigation. But what's happening sometimes, there might be traffic or there might be an incident on my route. And this morning I had this experience in exactly this experience where I got into the car, and a pop-up, let's say a small pop-up in the system said, "Hey, we estimate that you are going at this place, but today there's no traffic, so we suggest you an alternative route." And of course, this was based on the fact that the system has a kind of like a places learning model and also a trips learning model that are, let's say, working together. So the trips learning model would understand, okay, at this time of the day, on this day of the week, what's the likely trip that I'm gonna make, and then what's on my likely route. What's happening? Is it just business as usual, or is something changing? So that's clear, and I think I would say this is probably kind of like the version one of what could be done with AI and generative AI. There are more and more personalization, more and more of these things coming in. Let's say in the space of mobility and also in the vehicles. That's one thing. The other use case, and this is something that, let's say, my company has announced at CES this year, is also the element of predicting things. So AI also has one of the great benefits of AI is that it can work as a predictive function. And for example, where we've seen ourselves that there's a need for this is in the space of EV. So from this perspective, the typical experience for an EV driver is that you may have access to real-time information of where the charging station are, and you might see the real-time status. But what's going to happen when you are 2 hours from now in the middle of your route where you actually need a charging break? You're not able to actually tell it. So from this perspective, we've seen that with specifically deep learning models, you can actually look at longer time series, look at real-time data, and then figure out, okay, what's going to happen maybe in 2 hours from now, or tomorrow, or in a week from now at that charging station. And this is like an extra parameter that comes to it to says, okay, hey, in 2 hours from now, if you're driving from from Berlin to Munich, we estimate that at this charging station, you have a 75% likelihood to find an available station. And of course, this is important because it's an estimation at the end, so things could change. But you can actually look at availability across multiple charging stations and say, okay, you have three potential stops, and one has a 75%, one has only 10%, and maybe the other one has 30%. And then you, as the driver, or maybe also the navigation system, could decide, okay, then I'm going for this one because it's likely that I'm still gonna get there. And at the end of the day, this is the type of feature that increases the confidence that, okay, I have a bit more confidence that I get there, and not gonna be the fifth car in line waiting for a single charging station. And also, it's also a matter of planning and timing, because at the end of the day, what matters is when do you reach your destination, and whatever unexpected break or whatever time you lose by just waiting around for a charging station will actually add up to the time when you get to your destination. So yeah, these are some examples where we see that AI is already let's say able to help, but I think we will see many more in the coming year, as more and more OEMs are in the process of implementing kind of like Gen AI and large language model assistance in the vehicle.
Are there any particular geographical differences, either within sort of specific countries or across the globe, that you would emphasize in terms of countries that are particularly advanced and provide I guess, fruitful ecosystem for location-based services, whether it's regulation or just because for whatever reason there might be more companies that provide solutions or greater data availability or accuracy, and maybe some countries where providing these solutions is more challenging?
Yeah, so there is so there are very much, let's say, regional differences when it comes to either maturity or either, let's say, the state of in each region. So usually location intelligence and mapping in certain parts of the world is heavily regulated. So if I can call, for example, China, South Korea, and Japan, and so on, you have to have a local partner, or you have to be from the market to be able to operate, let's say, the full scale location services. And I think this might also probably apply vice versa, right? If we're in US, I'm sure that a Chinese mapping company might not have, let's say, the freedom to map everything as they do have at home. So that's one part of it. There's location, and mapping has always a regional element, and that needs to be considered. The other thing, I think it's also related to, I would say, at the end of the day, if you want to have kind of like high quality information and freshness and so on, also the density of users makes a difference. Because in a mature region like Europe, or particularly Western Europe, where we have lots of vehicles that are providing data and lots of vehicle driving many roads, of course, that's where let's say the resources to build up location data are at the highest. While I'm making it up, right? Maybe let's say certain places in Africa and so on, where there aren't that many cars on the roads, where level of connectivity is poor and so on. Also, the state of location services would not be on par with advanced areas. Now, that's one thing. The other thing, and I think this is more also in terms of the innovation, what can be done here. Also, regulation makes a difference. And for example, we are seeing ourselves that China are particularly advanced. Because they don't have kind of like equivalent things like GDPR as in Europe and so on. And basically the way companies can leverage data coming either from vehicles or from users is a bit, I would say, less constrained than it would be in places like Europe, where Europe is very mature and with very very mature regulation in place already. So, and this also makes a difference, right? I think also probably US is a bit less regulated than Europe, but probably not to the level of let's say of China.
You mentioned innovation there. Talking about innovation using location-based data assets and solutions, what are sort of the big trends that you see over the next, let's say, maybe up to 5 years that unlock future value and could transform the customer experience?
Yeah. So I would say, I think it kind of so in the past in automotive, you had the sort of the ACEs, the automated, the connected, electric, and shared. And I think even if this, I think probably kind of like the industry moved away from this terminology, and now they're talking about SDV and so on. I think in these pillars, automation, digital cockpit slash connectivity, EV, and also transportation, there's a lot of innovation that can be done across all these pillars. So I would say if we start maybe, let's say, with the ones that most related to generative AI, in the digital cockpit, I actually believe that the way you interact with the digital cockpit is going to change quite a lot. And I mean this also with the vehicle overall, but also how you interact with location and how location insights are actually brought into the driver experiences. And I'm saying this because currently, in most of the systems out there, as I said, most likely you might have some voice interaction, you might have some smart search and so on, but it's kind of like, let's say, limited to a single data set. It's, you can maybe look up addresses and you can look up things. You're not in a position to say now, hey, find me an exciting road where I can drive without where I can drive without traffic and with let's say a scenic roads. So that's the kind of things that we are seeing, that especially with the emergence of generative AI, it's becoming more and more tangible, to have these, kind of like experiences where you don't necessarily need to know what you're looking for. You need to know what you want to experience. And then, let's say the system itself would be able to find you the right experience. Of course, starting from drawing kind of like, let's say, the intelligence from the location insights. So that's one thing. The other thing, I think it's also where, staying in the space of software-defined vehicle, we're actually seeing now that with the centralization of navigation and ADAS, also the experiences are becoming more complete. As in, historically, you had your navigation experience and you have your ADAS experience, and even within companies, there are like very different departments. Probably you would know that, and everybody was building its own thing. Now we're seeing that where the industry is going is that there's much more overlap between these spaces. So your vehicle isn't just kind of like, let's say, following a route blindly. That vehicle would probably have the same information and would follow the same route that you put in the navigation. And the things that are let's say, you as a driver, depending on what the capability of the system, you most likely may need to supervise it, or in many cases you may not need to supervise it, but the vehicle itself would be able to do this kind of like, automated driving and navigation in the same time. So, to take you from A to B in without, you just need to input the destination, and then the system can take care of itself. And depending on the capability and depending on what kind of trips you are doing, you might actually not need to, well, let's say, to care neither about navigation or automated driving. You might be able to, let's say, to do emails or play in the car or something like that. So that's the other element of innovation. The other thing where, and I think probably electrification in certain parts of the world is still linearly growing. In other parts like Europe, I think, there's maybe, let's say, a bit of deceleration of the trend. But I think in the long run, and that's my personal opinion, this is still coming. I think, there are so many, my personal perspective is that in the space of electrification, we are probably where combustion vehicles were in 1910 or something like that. It's still very early days, and I think the progress with the battery and with intelligence and with infrastructure and so on, it's just gonna continue. And at one point, you will have a solution that's compelling, and it doesn't need to rely on subsidies. But also in this case, we are seeing that there is innovation that can be done at the intersection of kind of like, EV technology and also location intelligence. And what I mean by this is that in many ways, it would be ideal to say, okay, now we have cars that can drive 1,000 kilometers and we have charging stations for everyone, but it's not likely that this will happen, in the next 5 years. You will still probably have technology that gets better, but still is not completely kind of like range and charging is anxiety free. And then you will still have the networks that maybe have developed over time, but still for the users that are mainstream, they will not be able to say, okay, I have my own charging station, I don't need to care about it. And I think this is where I believe that the location intelligence element actually helps, because it provides, as in the example that I gave earlier, a bit more insights both for the vehicle to optimize the range, but on the same time also for the user to make sure that he has the right charging experiences, and he can get to its destination to to the most in the shortest time with least time wasted charging.
Final question from my side. You mentioned
Mhm.
that you're advising board members that implement location-based solution in automotive OEMs. What would be your top 3 recommendations to unlock the most value from related data and technology in their respective pillars?
Yeah, yeah, very good question. And I would say maybe kind of like my recommendation number one will not be just for location data. I think also number one for a board member in a car company would be have a data strategy, have a software and a data strategy. Quite often we see OEMs that they're kind of like, let's say, looking at I would say playing in their comfort zone, saying that okay, no, we are doing the hardware, and let's say we let someone else kind of like do the software and the monetizing the experience and bringing experiences and innovating without data. And I think that's probably good in a kind of like a short time horizon, but in the long run, as you know, with more electrification and more software and so on, industry has to operate also as a software and as a data industry. So from this perspective, we are seeing, let's say, that this is not something to be overlooked in terms of what needs to be set up and have, as and especially data in this case, right? And this could be, let's say, working with trusted location data partners, have yourself data expertise in the company. That's also good. Data is kind of like the engine of innovation, right? Because your software will actually grow with data, and your, I would say, updates of software updates of today might be based on driver behavior. Updates software of tomorrow will be based on the driver behavior data of today, right? Because you can get new insights, you can get new capabilities. So the more you understand it, the more this is kind of like ingrained into the company, the data strategy, the better you have the chances, to provide new experiences and keep your customers engaged. That's one thing. The second recommendation, I would say, from this perspective, would be just kind of like there's a lot going on in the industry, right? So I think on one hand, there's pushes for electrification, for software, and it's challenging. It's also the market, let's say, the market criteria, the market dynamics are also not probably the best, and also next year might not be the best year by the looks of it now. But I think this is still kind of like, let's say, a long-term game, and I believe that whoever, let's say, persists and has a clear strategy and focuses on their strength, and will prevail. I think every slowdown or every potential crisis, the winners come out stronger out of it. So I think from this perspective, I see that there's so much that can be innovated in automotive, and we're just probably scratching the surface of what can be done with software and data. That it's an exciting time, and we should not be looking at only on the negatives. Electrification is slowing down, or the vehicles productions are decreasing for certain OEMs and so on. I think it's I see that the future will be bright, for the ones that are weathering the storm. And last but not least, I would also say would be what I'm seeing, at least from automotive, is make sure that you have the right talent and resources. And when I mean also resources, of course, it also comes down to people, but I will also say, look at what AI can actually do for you. Even if you're not getting more people, how can you actually increase their productivity with AI tools, with Gen AI and so on? Because the world is moving much faster. And we are seeing that, especially coming back to the Chinese OEMs, for them, things that in a normal Western development cycle for automobile would take maybe years, for them might be something that they do with weeks or months. So the speed of innovation, and also not just automotive but also in other industries, now with for a software defined industry, is much quicker, and you have to have your best resources to be able to catch up with that.
No, thanks so much, Andrei. That was super insightful. Really appreciate you taking time for this today.
I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure, and it's great. First of all, as I said, to follow your podcast, and to also learn from others. As I hope that people appreciated seeing the insights. And as you said, I think the first time when we spoke, with location data, it wasn't something that previously was brought in discussion. So I appreciate the chance to talk to you, and good luck with the next episodes. And I'm excited as a listener for what's gonna come.
Thanks, Andrei.